Namaste and welcome to Viewpoint. 3 years since the escalation of the Russian-Ukraine conflict, we've seen the United States has changed its gears on Ukraine. President Trump has gone ballistic on its president, Volodymyr Zelensky. So what's happening over here and why is Trump going all out, blazing all guns on Zelensky? We're going to discuss on that. So we have with us Mr. Suresh Kochattil, a political researcher and analyst. Namaste ji.
Namaskar.
So you've seen today Trump has made a very interesting post on Truth Social, which he also put it later on X, where he specifically called Zelensky as a modestly successful comedian. So this is a major stance, a major change in stance from what Biden would earlier call him as a patriot and whatnot, and where Russia was the antagonist. Now suddenly it seems the antagonist is Zelensky. So what is prompting Trump to call him in such a way?
Well, there are two things you need to look at. One is Trump is handling his domestic politics. That is a big thing that's happening there. No Doge and everything, cutting down on cost. At the same time, putting in tariffs to countries which impose bigger tariffs. The second part of it, what you're seeing is trying to subdue the Gazan fire by getting Israel to agree to a ceasefire, and then now the exchange of hostages or even the bodies of the hostages which are released today. And then trying to get rid of Hamas by saying we'll rebuild Gaza.
Right.
Same thing with Lebanon. They've declared Houthis as a terrorist group. So all that is going on. So he wants to stop. In fact, Trump made a statement today saying, I'm trying to stop all the wars in the world.
Right.
The two major ones, Gaza and Ukraine. And he made specific mention of Zelensky as a part-time comedian or slightly successful comedian. And he also called him a dictator, by the way.
Correct. Unelected and
yeah, unelected dictator. So there's been a sparring of allegations against each other. Zelensky saying Trump is a victim of the Russian propaganda. The US president doesn't need to fall for Russian propaganda. It's very, very obvious. But let's look at where it all started. Well, Gaza was easy to do because Israel was all powerful. Iran could be tackled. So could it be the triple H, which they call it, Houthis, Hezbollah and Hamas could be handled. Whereas Ukraine, Russia was a different thing altogether. President Trump always had good relations with Putin. I mean, the first term also, if you recollect, he had a very good relations with him, in spite of allegations that the Russians tried to meddle in the US election and all that kind of stuff. But what has happened since then is once he came into office, he realized that this was a war that was going nowhere.
Right.
Nobody was winning this war. It was just US pumping in money, the Europeans pumping in money. And as he said today, US has less interest in Ukraine, Russia, because they don't have a physical border.
There's an ocean.
There's an ocean separating, a beautiful ocean separating us. On the other hand, Europe has a stake in it. When he said that Zelensky started the war, remember, it was not the physical war he's talking about. It is Zelensky's move to join the NATO that started the entire war.
Right.
So when people are misjudging him by saying, he didn't fire the weapon first, it was Putin who fired. But it's not necessarily the weapon that is fired. It's a geopolitical stance that he took. Why did he have to go to NATO? Because he went to NATO and said, I want a NATO membership. Putin didn't want a NATO nation sitting next to Russia. Very, very obvious.
Correct.
So he wanted to create another set of nations along Russia so that there could be a buffer between Ukraine and Russia in the event Ukraine takes up a NATO membership or Ukraine is given a NATO membership.
Right.
That never happened. And we saw Donetsk and all those regions taken away by Russia. They created a good buffer zone there.
Right.
Europe had its own thing against Russia. They, of course, were dependent hugely on Russian gas and oil. And Germany especially, and other nations also who have pipelines running all the way to their nations. Now, when all this was going on for the last 3 years, Biden was like kind of blind to all this. According to Trump himself, and I'm quoting him, that $350 billion, it might be in military equipment, it might be in cash. And he was saying that Zelensky was playing fiddle with Biden. They use a different fiddle concept.
Correct.
Basically, they're playing, he was literally kind of playing his hands on Biden and making him do what he wants. And each time he said, each time Zelensky comes to US, he walks away with $60 billion. He's a great salesman, he said.
Do you feel this is a political rhetoric, or do you actually think somebody like Zelensky could influence the United States and, the entire state of, in which Biden was administering? He could actually convince them to pay, or is it the other way? I mean, because most people are feeling it was US actually playing the fiddle with Zelensky, right?
See, the first part was correct. The second part, as the war drew into kind of a slanging match both ways, we saw Ukraine dropping bombs on using all the advanced European drones and everything. and Russia that went into China and Iran and got their missiles and drones. The Russian industry was a big hit because of sanctions. So both ways the war was being fought. So first step, we saw Russia having an advantage, conquering large areas. And then we saw Zelensky coming with weapons. Now, the main aim of President Biden and also the Europeans was to make Russia weak.
Right.
Okay. So in the hope that Putin would go away. It was like a pre-Gorbachev era. They wanted Brezhnev kind of era. They didn't want Brezhnev, but they were okay with Gorbachev.
Right.
And Gorbachev was the one who literally split the Soviet Union into bits and pieces of what we see today, including Ukraine. So what is happening today is that trying to recover that good old days of bipolar power that was there. You had one bloc called Soviets, other bloc called US. You're either with us or with them.
Right.
But over a period of time, Russia kind of faded away, but there was still a very, very potent force.
Right.
What President Trump has realized is very clear is that, look, there's no point in fighting this war. I would rather have a deal with the Russians. I would sell them oil, or they would buy oil, whichever way he looks at it. And they would also buy other things from US. And US would get access to huge natural reserves, which Russia has. They need lithium badly for all their work. They need tungsten. They need a lot of other minerals. In fact, the same mineral question came into being in Zelensky's case.
Right.
Yesterday also President Trump made the statement which he repeated on Air Force One today, saying that we gave them money, but we never asked anything in return. And that is something foolish with Sleepy Biden. He was referring to Sleepy Biden did it.
So actually the question is now, Trump has stated about $350 billion has been given. Zelensky says we only got a fraction of it, the rest of it is not accounted. Then Trump says that Europe has given only about $100 billion. But again, he said Europe is going to get it back. So what does he mean? So what is the arrangement between Europe and Ukraine and US and Ukraine when they were actually giving them money, aiding them for the war?
See, one was US was trying to send their weaponry to Ukraine.
Right.
They had a lot of weaponry where they wanted more production so that more employment could be generated. So the 350 billion which President Trump is speaking about, which President Biden had given, included maybe around 250 billion worth of arms and ammunition. Rest 100 would be other things.
Right.
Cash, food, everything else. On the other hand, what Europe gave was actually 250 billion. In fact, President Trump said 100 billion less than what we gave.
Okay.
So it is 250 billion on an average here or there. 250 billion, they gave maximum arms. They didn't give anything much of cash.
Okay.
So obviously, the entire trade-off was that Europe would subsidize more because they were fighting a war at the doorstep.
Right.
And US had nothing to do with it. We spoke of the big ocean in between. So the question now is simple. Keir Starmer says he will send British troops to Ukraine if required. That is foolish. That is foolish. And that's exactly what President Trump is saying will set up a third world war. He doesn't want to happen. He wants this war to end quickly. Because one, he gets access to all the $350 billion which he had given to Ukraine. He wants minerals to be given out. There's an agreement that was drafted and agreed upon between Biden and Zelensky.
So does that stand valid
no,
as of today?
He says, day for yesterday, Zelensky says, I've scrapped the deal. So for all you know, Aditya, by the time we discuss the next viewpoint, Zelensky will be out. One of the earlier discussions in one of the debates we had in Nationalist Hub, I spoke about the fact that Zelensky has a huge mansion in Switzerland, which he bought with the money that US and Europe had given him. He stashed a lot of money abroad, which he says that half the money which US gave, he doesn't have an account for it. So $170 odd billion. There's no account for it, imagine. So he siphoned it off. That President Trump knows it.
Is it like an exit strategy in case things were to go
It will go wrong. I mean, he will be forced to leave because look at the triple strategy of President Trump. One, he calls him a dictator without getting elected. And when they said that during a war, they cannot get elections, somebody said in Europe, even in UK, during the Second World War, there was elections.
Correct. Winston Churchill came into power.
Yeah. So there's no big deal about having an election. President Zelensky doesn't want to have elections, very obvious reasons. Second, the damage that is done to the entire buildings, and he compared it to Gaza, President Trump. He said at least Gaza doesn't look so bad as much as Ukraine does today. It will take ages to restore it back, which is true. Which is true because, see, Gaza is a very small territory. Ukraine is a huge territory.
Right.
So it's going to take a lot of time to rebuild it, except Kyiv, which even President Trump mentioned today. Every other town has been decimated. Decimated is not the word. Russia lost a lot of its people, but they didn't lose their buildings or anything. On the other hand, Ukraine lost a lot of its building and less number of people had died. Less in a sense, little bit less, nothing great about it. Here also the millions died, there also millions died. So the entire war is now reaching a stage where President Trump wants to be like the statesman of the world. He was going back to becoming what US was initially, the policeman of the world. So he's taking it back to that state. He's telling Zelensky, forget it. You had 3 years to sit down and talk to Putin. You didn't talk to him. So now don't say that I didn't start the war. You had a chance to sort it out. You didn't sort it out. I am going to sort it out. And that's his strategy.
Right. So now President Trump is going to meet Putin in Saudi Arabia. That is what he said in a couple of days.
Yeah.
So do you think the rhetoric that he's having against Zelensky right now is in a way paving a kind of a conversation that he can have with Putin at a later point?
See, the deal with Putin is going to be very simple. At the end of the day, it should look like as if Zelensky also got something, rather Ukraine got something. Territory is ruled out. At the maximum, President Putin may agree to a couple of small towns to be given away, nothing bordering Russia. He will give us something bordering Ukraine side. At the same time, he will seek the fact that Ukraine will not take up NATO membership. That even US has ruled out. You can go and take a EU membership, it doesn't make any sense actually. EU is in a mess anyway. At the same time, President Trump wants to ensure with Putin that look, we're going to be together and we're going to do a lot of things. And that obviously is the business part of it. It can be oil, it can be gas, which I mentioned before, it can be minerals, it can be defense. So everything that President Trump will say, President Putin will agree. First thing and first, he will have to get out of the bans. Basically SWIFT, which is basically your international transactions. Everything is banned today. Russia doesn't have access to any equipment from anywhere, and that they can buy now. They can sell oil on the international market. They were selling at $30 to $40 a barrel. They can now sell it at $70 to $80 a barrel, make money. They can start selling gas to Europe, whichever nations will need it. All these are going to happen now. So for President Putin, it's a win-win situation. For President Trump, it is an elderly statesman who sorted out a war which is going nowhere. Look at what Biden did and look at what I did. And that's going to be the kind of a clincher that is going to come about. Because this is a war that should not have started in the first place, as President Trump rightly said. It is more of an ego between President Putin and Zelensky. And Zelensky was going down the drain till Europe stepped in. They knew that they had to help him, otherwise he was gone. They pumped in money and armaments like crazy. And today, even if they pump in another $200 billion, this war is not going to go anywhere. In the entire bargain, Zelensky lost, but I think Europe lost a big amount. Europe and Trump are today two different camps. Right. Putin and Trump look to be in one camp. Correct. Europe is in a separate camp altogether. And that is the most dangerous thing that can happen, because the assumption was that NATO, as a member of NATO, US also had a very close relationship with, the European countries, right, which President Biden and Kamala Harris had it, but no longer now. It's very clear that unless Europe plays along with Trump, he is going to neglect them and neglect them like crazy. And he's going to put tariff. Just watch, the next round of tariffs are coming now. And that is going to hurt China, nothing much, because already 10% there. It's going to hurt Europe. European sales to US will take a big, big hit. And for all you know, it's going to be worse than the battle with China in terms of the economy.
So do you think actually Trump's strategy right now is to tone down the war in Ukraine and Gaza, but then have something more in the trade war kind of a thing, not a hard-coded hard war with weaponry, but a trade one with all trade tariffs and reciprocal tariffs and all of that? So is he in a way setting the chess pieces in a place that now US will be seen as a competitor to China and not to Russia? Is that what he's trying to do?
Yeah, in fact, we forgot to mention China and the entire thing. During this war with Ukraine, Kremlin was basically banking on two nations to help them. One was China, other was North Korea.
What about Iran? Iran is also...
Iran was there, but they couldn't physically do much because US was tracking them. They did supply some drones and all that, which they're very well known for, some missiles and all that. But the Russians had the missile, they didn't have the drones for it.
Right.
So they got that from Iran. North Korea provided people on the ground, the soldiers. They anyway have a lot of them sitting there free. So that let us use them, and a lot of them died in the battle. No accounts for it. China is the most important. President Trump wants to kind of counter China badly. He wants to drive down Chinese economy, and he's going to do everything that it takes. So he doesn't want China and Russia to get closer. And this is one strategy. Draw out Putin from it. Make him an ally of yours. Your enemy's enemy is my friend, and that's exactly the point. And that is what President Trump is doing, is that China is going to get relegated now. China will have no friends left in this battle. That is why they're cozying up to India. They're cozying up to nations which they were kind of laughing at a few months ago. And now China knows that they are kind of isolated in the entire bargain. And if President Trump manages to stop the Ukraine-Russia war, war is anyway stopped. There's no more bombing going on.
Right.
Very little here and there stuff. But he's basically, President Trump has used Ukraine like a pawn in a chess game, and is willing to sacrifice that pawn to win the, on the chessboard. He wants to win the game. That's a bigger point.
So since you said, Russia was banking on China and North Korea, we've seen in Trump's previous term, initially started against North Korea with fire and fury and all those kinds of things. But later we see him, having a bonhomie with Kim Jong-un, shaking hands with him,
Yeah.
So do you think he's going to do that again to make China feel truly isolated? That, okay, fine, my friends, Russia and North Korea, both of them are with the US right now.
So he will first handle Russia. He will first handle Ukraine. He will then have Gaza. I think North Korea is not doing much of stuff now. They keep firing an occasional missile here or there. But there's nothing big happening out there. And anyway, it's an isolated country. But I think in the end of first term or second term, or rather first year or second year, President Trump still might go across to Pyongyang and shake hands with Kim Jong-un. We don't know what he'll do. President Trump is very difficult to predict. But more important is the fact that he is now kind of helping a lot of nations in an indirect way. Like he's telling them, boss, if your business with me is $100 billion, let us take it to $500 billion. Let us have a trade deal. Okay, and that is what the main thing. So his battle is on two fronts. As I said at the start of this chat we are having, one is economic, another is political. And the political one is what you're seeing in Gaza and you're seeing in Ukraine, Russia. There's no other big wars happening right now. And on the economic front, he's having a battle internally with the kind of inefficiency in the US government. The second is his tariffs, which he's going to kind of put on nations which kind of are not doing great business with US, as he calls it. So the two-front war that he's having. And I'm sure that, as he said, somebody asked him, how come you are getting into Russia? And he said, I've been here only for 3-4 weeks now.
Right.
20th is exactly 1 month from the time he took oath. So within 1 month, I think President Trump has, whatever said, you may not like him or you may love him, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, he did what many US presidents could not even do for the full term, especially Biden. When you start comparing apple to apple with Biden and Trump has walked away with honors.
In fact, Biden's initial moves were, withdrawing from Afghanistan. It showed US in quite a weak kind of an imagery.
It was not withdrawing, it was fleeing. They left their equipment and ran. Okay, that is the most dangerous thing that happened there. Because that equipment fell into the hands of the Taliban. Of course, they couldn't use much of it because it was like stripping a car without tires and engine and then going. And that's what the US did. But more importantly, it was the image that the US lost of a nation that got frightened by a group of terrorists in Taliban. But over that, all has changed, because if you remember Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and those days in Afghanistan, the early days when the Soviets brought him in as a de facto ruler there, as their own ruler. And after that, the Americans pumped in money heavily into Pakistan. Pakistan built up Taliban, and then Al-Qaeda came into being. Finally, the Basmasur effect happened. Taliban attacked US itself, and the rest is history.
Correct.
But I think the entire geopolitical situation has changed. Look at Saudi Arabia today. Why are they hosting the talks?
Correct.
There's a big meaning in that, actually. Saudi Arabia wants to show itself as a nation that has moved on beyond oil, moved on beyond burqas, moved on beyond hijabs. They are now organizing fashion shows. They're having big kind of events out there.
A liberalized
nation. And as MBS says, he wants to take Saudi Arabia to where Europe is today by 2030. And I think he will do it. There's no choice. I think every nation there has realized it. The Qataris are now in India speaking to the Indians. And they are known to be the home to all the terrorist groups in the world. Everybody has a branch office.
Including Hamas.
Head office is sitting in Qatar. But then they are changing, because the US has the biggest Air Force base in Qatar. And their biggest naval base across in Bahrain. So they are having everything. Manama, they have a big naval base. So US has the finger in every place, but what they are trying to do is basically, one, bring down their deficit so that inflation comes down. So even if Doge is able to save, say, $1 or $2 or even $3 trillion, it's a big saving to start with. And that money, President Trump wants to use it for his domestic audience. And for the international audience, he will play a very quid pro quo game. I gave you $350 billion, give me the minerals for it. I'm not asking you for the money back. And that President Zelensky is caught between a rock and a hard place. He has no choice. I think within a week or 10 days, Zelensky will be gone. If he wants to stay, then he has to compromise with Trump.
Right.
And if he's not prepared to do that, Trump will just ease him away. It can be another US aid operation that happened like in Bangladesh or elsewhere.
So as a concluding question, when it comes to India, so India had a kind of a vision for a $5 trillion economy, third largest economy in the world. So with what's happening globally, with Trump's moves, with bonhomie with Russia, is it going to be easier for India right now economically as well? Because now there's no concern about Russia and US. You can just do business anywhere.
More importantly, if you increase your business with US to 3 times or 4 times of what you're doing now, in which President Trump is ready. He's saying just that you allow me to sell Harley Davidsons in India, which nobody will buy in any way. It's not in the, not nobody will buy, not in the volumes like a Honda would sell it, or other bike companies in India would sell it. But the question is very simple: is if India can increase its trade with US by 4 times, then you're very close getting to that GDP where you can cross and say, I'm the 3rd largest economy. Japan is down, UK is down, all the advanced nations are coming down. There are only 2 nations which are standing ahead of India right now. And that is, of course, China and US. And if India can join that club with US, I think there 2 things can happen. One is we edge closer to China. And second, we get a large footprint in the US. For us, it's not probably if they want to sell pistachios in India, the Americans, or they want to sell avocados in India, please go ahead. Be my guest. That's what Modi would say. But let us sell pharmaceuticals. Let us sell services, especially IT services. Allow us to sell everything there in the US. Our agriculture produce as per US is heavily subsidized. So naturally, there's a duty that's going to come on that. But it doesn't matter. If you can increase our pharmaceutical exports, that would be good enough to kind of compete in the US. But let us increase the trade by 4 times. And if Europe is not willing to do it, we'll go elsewhere. But we have to hit the $3 trillion even 2 or 3 years before the target.
Right. Great. So thank you so much for your valuable insights.
Thank you.
So you heard today's discussion. What do you think about it? Please comment below. We'll catch up again. Namaste and Jai Hind.